They were trained to face ambushes, not myths, but what U.S. soldiers reported seeing in the mountains near Kandahar was something no briefing had prepared them for, a towering pale giant that moved like it had been waiting for them for centuries. And if you think you know the Kandahar Giant story, this case goes far deeper than anything ever leaked before, so before this disappears like the others, subscribe now and stay with us to the very end. The patrol was supposed to be routine, a low-visibility recon sweep through a stretch of rocky Afghan highlands marked only by an old Soviet-era grid reference and a warning from locals who refused to travel there after sunset. And Staff Sergeant Miller remembered joking over the radio that the place felt like the edge of the map, the kind of terrain where myths were born because no one stayed long enough to fact-check them. But that joke died the moment the thermal scanner picked up a heat signature that didn't make sense, too tall, too cold, and moving against the wind, because when they finally saw it with their own eyes, emerging from between two slabs of stone like something waking up from a long sleep, it was pale, hairless, and impossibly large, well over 12 feet, its skin reflecting moonlight like chalk. Its eyes sunk deep and dark as if they had never adapted to modern light, and for several seconds no one fired because every man there felt the same heavy pressure in his chest, the kind you get at high altitude mixed with pure instinctive dread. And the thing didn't roar or charge like in movies, it simply stood there watching them as if measuring time itself, and when Private Torres whispered that it looked old, older than war, older than borders, Miller realized the radio had gone dead even though their equipment showed full signal, which was when the giant took a single step forward and the ground vibrated, not violently, but with a deep, rolling pulse like the echo of something vast moving underground, and training kicked in as warning shots cracked the silence, bullets striking stone and dust but barely reacting against the creature's hide, which flinched not in pain but in irritation, and then it moved, not fast but inevitable, crossing distance in strides that made no sense, forcing the squad to scatter and retreat toward a narrow ravine they hadn't noticed before. A cut in the earth that looked less eroded and more deliberate, like an entrance, and Miller would later swear that the giant didn't pursue them because it wanted to kill them, but because it wanted them to see what lay beyond that opening. And as they fell back, slipping and scrambling, the ravine walls revealed markings, etched symbols that matched nothing in modern databases but triggered something in the back of Miller's mind from a classified briefing he'd barely paid attention to. A file marked with red tabs referencing pre-human anomalies and non-hostile containment zones, and that was when the air changed completely, thickening, pressing inward, causing headaches and nosebleeds as if reality itself didn't like being disturbed, and just before they reached the extraction point, the giant stopped, standing at the ravine's mouth like a guardian rather than a predator, raising one elongated hand and pressing it flat against the stone, causing the symbols to glow faintly, not bright or dramatic, just enough to confirm they were active, alive, and ancient. And in that moment Miller understood the horrifying twist, that this wasn't a random encounter, and the giant wasn't an enemy soldier had stumbled upon, but a sentinel, something placed there long before nations existed, guarding entrances that humans were never meant to reopen. And when air support finally arrived minutes later, the entire area went silent, scanners empty, terrain readings altered as if the mountains had subtly shifted. And within hours the patrol was debriefed by men who didn't wear rank insignia and didn't ask questions so much as correct answers, informing them that what they saw would be classified under geological misidentification, warning them that further discussion would jeopardize national security. And yet years later, after discharge, after the nightmares of pale skin and glowing symbols never fully stopped, Miller would receive an unmarked envelope containing a single satellite image dated decades earlier showing the same ravine, the same markings, and a handwritten note that chilled him more than the encounter itself, subject still active. Kandahar was not the first sight. It will not be the last, and that is why soldiers who served in that region still avoid certain valleys, why locals lower their voices when the moon is high, and why some secrets aren't buried by governments, but by things far older, still watching, still waiting. Miller tried to forget the envelope, tried to tell himself it was a prank stitched together by his own trauma, but the satellite image wouldn't leave his mind because when he overlaid it with his own helmet cam stills, the angles matched perfectly, The ravine walls too precise to be natural, and the symbols, though blurred, were unmistakably the same, which pushed him to contact two others from the patrol who had quietly drifted off the grid after discharge, Torres and Doc Hanley. Both of whom answered his message within minutes as if they had been waiting years for someone else to admit the truth, and when they met in a cheap motel off a forgotten highway. It became clear none of them had healed because Hanley confessed that during the extraction he'd seen something no one else had mentioned. The ground beneath the giant's head briefly opened like a breathing wound, revealing a depth that swallowed light. And that was when Miller realized the twist went deeper than a single encounter, because Torres pulled out a cracked hard drive he'd stolen from a debrief terminal back in Bagram. A drive containing fragments of a program buried under layers of deniability, references to Sentinel-class entities and threshold zones, along with footage dating back to the 1960s showing different terrains, Patagonia, the Caucasus, Arctic Norway, each with towering pale figures standing motionless near stone formations that mirrored Kandahar's geometry, and the most disturbing detail wasn't their size or age but the notation stamped across multiple files. Do not engage, stability depends on presence, suggesting these giants weren't threats but anchors, biological or otherwise, holding something far worse in place, and as they pieced it together, a pattern emerged that chilled them all. The sites activated during periods of heavy excavation, warfare, or seismic disruption, as if humanity's noise was knocking on doors it didn't know existed. And Kandahar had flared because of unreported tunneling operations tied to a black-budget extraction effort that never officially happened, which explained why their radios died and why the mountains seemed to rearrange themselves. Because the land itself was part of the containment, and when Miller finally asked the question none of them wanted to voice, what happens if a sentinel leaves, Torres answered by showing a final clip marked Red Loss event, grainy and brief, depicting a barren valley after a giant had vanished, the ground collapsing inward slowly and endlessly, not explosively, consuming structures, vehicles, even sound, until the footage cut out, and in that moment the motel lights flickered. A low-frequency hum vibrating through the floorboards in a way Miller recognized instantly, the same pressure he'd felt in Kandahar. Which was when they noticed the sky outside had taken on a strange washed-out hue. A GPS on their phone spun uselessly, and before panic could set in, a knock came at the door, not aggressive, not urgent, but patient, and standing in the hallway were two civilians with calm eyes and no visible weapons, who addressed Miller by name and said, almost kindly, the sentinel near Kandahar shifted last night. Explaining that the giants weren't immortal but exhausted, slowly degrading after millennia of holding thresholds closed. And that Miller's patrol hadn't been attacked because the entity was deciding whether humanity was capable of taking responsibility for what lay beneath, and then came the most brutal revelation of all. The giants were not born there, they were placed, engineered by a civilization that predated recorded history, a species that understood the universe not as empty space but as layered pressure, stacked realities prone to collapse if left unguarded. And now those creators were gone, leaving behind custodians who were failing, which meant the program's real purpose wasn't secrecy but succession, identifying humans who could withstand proximity to thresholds without losing their minds. And Miller realized with horror that their survival that night hadn't been luck, it had been a test, because as the civilians turned to leave, one of them paused and said, "You'll be contacted again when the Sentinel decides," and outside, far beyond the motel, something vast shifted beneath the earth, slow and deliberate, like an ancient guardian adjusting its stance, reminding them that the Kandahar case wasn't about what soldiers saw, but about what humanity might soon be forced to replace.